Good afternoon and welcome to BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch, powered by Austral Asset Management. It's the 20th of February and our regular Monday guest is with us today, Vishnu Varathan, Head of Economics and Strategy at Mizuho Bank. He's coming out of Singapore, but today not visually because of technical issues. Vishnu, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, Brian. It's always good to be here to start the Monday with you.
Now, Vishnu, for a start, what is top of mind for you at the start of the week as we're looking ahead to quite a busy week ahead?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We've got a lot of rising, apprehension, I think, as we're getting into the week. And I use the word apprehension because it covers, several facets. One has been that of hawkish Fed, so where markets had, ended last year and started this year with some jubilation that they're getting towards a peak Fed and, more importantly, a Fed pivot. Recent run of hot labor market inflation and activity data alongside hawkish Fed comments have started to create jitters about the Fed doing more and holding rates higher for longer. You see that in higher US Treasury yields that are up between 40 to 50 basis points since the start of the month. The dollar is also higher by about 3 to 4% since the start of this month. And you also see equities taking a bit of a knock. That has been further heightened by geopolitics as well. Apart from the US-China balloon fiasco, we have also had North Korea firing off intercontinental missiles, and these ballistic missiles, supposedly reaching altitudes of 5,000 kilometers. So, threatening to have range to hit the US will certainly bring up geopolitical tensions a notch in the Korean Peninsula and the Sea of Japan. That's over and above US-China issues that we saw between Secretary Blinken and Wang Yi, the foreign minister. So these things would also take a little bit of risk off the table as markets get quite cautious. And in Asia, we need to be concerned about spillover effects from the China impact. If that translates into a little bit of cautious capital flows or weakness coming through the renminbi that could reverberate through other EM Asia currencies. So overall, I would say it is a mood of caution. Markets would much rather be safe, in which case they are not extending bets into risk assets. And I think inevitably EM Asia assets may also not feature that favorably on a prolonged basis as we head into the middle of the week for the FOMC minutes.
Now, Vishnu, speaking of EM Asia, Malaysia is set to unveil its budget this Friday. The new government is unveiling its first budget. What are the expectations around Malaysia, and what is the lens that investors are looking at Malaysia through?
I mean, those are really, I think, key points about the new government. I think surely the political risk premium has gone down. That, however, does not address the fiscal sustainability issues, with oil revenues probably set to shrink this year, although not collapse. The question then turns to revenues. PM Anwar made some comments about new sources of revenue. So there will, I think in the street will be rife with speculation about whether this would constitute, reinstating a positive rate of GST, albeit a small start. Or whether it be new tax revenues, be it so-called sin taxes or wealth taxes or windfall taxes. So markets will be watching these, particularly given the backdrop of probably having to scale back and rationalize some of the subsidies. How this is done will also, I think, matter, because this will have real impact on households struggling with the cost of living crisis. And it would also suggest to us the kind of domestic resilience, the trade-off between domestic resilience from fiscal support and the need to consolidate. That would, of course, have an impact on the ringgit. The bar is pretty high, not just because of the actual fiscal challenges, but also due to the less than sweet mood of the markets that we just discussed. So it's a rather high bar. We think there'll be some efforts to mild consolidation, subsidies being a bit more targeted, maybe some references to GST making a comeback, albeit not immediately given the political hot potato issues around it.
Now, finally, Vishnu, there's also a lot of activity across the region in terms of central bank activity, also meeting minutes, for example, out of the RBA. What are some key events and data points that you're watching out for that could move markets besides the ones that you've already mentioned?
You're absolutely right on that. I mean, with the hawkish Fed, again, to use that terminology, the bar is raised for the central banks around the region. RBA minutes will be paid attention to because of the conflict in the data. You've got very hot inflation, but you also got some softening in the jobs numbers. Yet the RBA has alluded to rising wages and wage expectations. So the minutes, I think markets will be poring over it to see whether the RBA is indeed turning more hawkish, and how much more hawkish in line with the plural rate hikes reference at the last meeting. We also have the Bank of Korea. The Bank of Korea was one of the first to start, if you recall, back in August 2021, they started their hiking cycle. So this is perhaps arguably a time for them to pause and assess. Although, again, they're caught on the wrong foot where this could translate into some buckles in the Korean won if it doesn't resonate well with the general risk sentiments around market demand, China risks, or the chip cycle. So those are worth watching, and it's also an ongoing assessment of how EM Asia central banks trade off against protecting growth versus macro and currency stability.
Now, Vishnu, on that note, thank you very much for your insights and thank you for coming on the show.
My pleasure as always, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Now, we've been speaking to Vishnu Varathan, Head of Economics and Strategy at Mizuho Bank on BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch, powered by Austral Asset Management. I'm Brian Fernandez. This video and podcast will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.